Chapter 4. People sat at various tables inside the smoky pub. They all looked up to see who had entered. As last year, their eyes lit up in recognition of Cousin Harry. "Hey there! Good to see you!" shouted one person cheerfully. "Saw your wife and the young ones earlier today. I wondered when you'd be by," said another. "I had a few errands to run first," replied Cousin Harry pleasantly. "Good to see you." Several others in the room gave Cousin Harry a wave or a greeting of some sort. This year, Holly could sense the warmth behind the greetings. People were genuinely glad to see him. Cousin Harry's responses were equally sincere. Harry and Holly made their way to the back door and entered the vacant lot behind the pub. Sasha jumped out of her bag and happily began to run about exploring. "Would you like the honors?" Cousin Harry asked Holly as they approached the brick wall and back. "I guess so," replied Holly uncertainly. "But I don't know what to do." "You'll need your wand," he instructed. Holly drew out Lily's wand and held it out in front of the wall expectantly. Cousin Harry directed her to the bricks above a trash can. "Count," he commanded. 3 up, 2 across. Holly counted out the bricks and then looked at Cousin Harry for further directions. "Tap the wall 3 times with your wand," he said, "and then stand back." Holly gave the brick 3 sharp raps and stood back next to Cousin Harry. Before her eyes, the bricks seemed to wiggle and a small hole appeared that grew larger and larger until a huge archway had formed. "Welcome to Diagon Alley," said Cousin Harry simply. Holly looked beyond the brick archway and stared in amazement. The alley was packed with people bustling about, wearing robes of all colors. There seemed to be no walking space at all. Nestled between all the people were stalls filled with shoppers, and behind that she saw stores with brightly painted signs. "Where did all those people come from?" she asked. "There surely weren't this many here last year." "Last year, if you recall, we went shopping after school at Hogwarts had begun," explained Cousin Harry mildly. "The train for Hogwarts leaves tomorrow. Almost everyone comes today for last-minute shopping. You'd think we'd know better, you know. Shop early to avoid the crowds and the rush, but we don't. Today's the day you can see just about everyone and anyone. It's a good day to socialize. Tomorrow, this alley will look like a ghost street." "Oh," said Holly, staring at all the people. "Where are we going first?" She couldn't imagine how they would ever find the rest of the Potters in this crowd. "I think we'll make a visit to Gringotts. That's the Wizard Bank," replied Cousin Harry. "Really?" said Holly curiously. "Why?" "Well, there's a deposit in your name there I think you should see," came the reply. "In my name?" said Holly with surprise. "Whatever for?" "The Ministry of Magic awarded you a monetary gift during the summer," said Cousin Harry. "They were rather appreciative of your efforts against Tom Riddle last year and wanted to do something to express their gratitude. I told them you didn't need it," he added, "but they insisted. It's hard to say no to the Minister of Magic," Cousin Harry concluded. "Now, stay close to me," and Cousin Harry led Holly through the crowds of people down the alley towards Gringotts. Sasha trailed along behind. They made their way to a snowy white building that towered over the other little shops. "Did you really break out of here riding on a dragon?" inquired Holly as she looked up at the huge structure with its burnished bronze doors. Cousin Harry stopped and looked at Holly in amazement. "Wherever did you hear that?" he asked her. "Some of the students told me that last year," replied Holly. "Well, did you?" "Yeah," said Cousin Harry. "I guess I did. But I wouldn't mention anything about it around the folks at Gringotts. They're a little touchy on the subject." Holly laughed. "I guess they would be," she said. Touchy was a bit of an understatement. After the death of Lord Voldemort, there still remained a large gaping hole left by the dragon who had escaped Gringotts and the 3 people who helped it escape. While the wizard community was happy to overlook anything Harry might have done while trying to defeat Lord Voldemort, the goblin community was not so forgiving. Unthinkable that the hero of the Battle of Hogwarts be subjected to goblin justice, the Ministry of Magic entered into negotiations with Gringotts officials. After much discussion, an undisclosed amount of wizard gold was given to help repair the Gringotts building, and total banking control of Gringotts was returned to the hands of the goblins. That made it possible for Harry, Ron, and Hermione to walk the streets of London and Diagon Alley without fear of goblin reprisal. It did not, however, get them into Gringotts. That had taken additional negotiations. Griphook appeared at Harry's side one day, requesting a meeting between Ron, Hermione, and Harry and the Gringotts officials. The next day, Griphook arrived at the Leaky Cauldron with 2 other goblins to meet with Harry and his friends in a private room upstairs. Griphook introduced the 2 goblins with him as Grinfield and Gottenram, presidents of Gringotts. All 3 goblins had swarthy faces, pointed beards, and large feet. Their fingers were long and thin, and their domed heads seemed too large to fit their smaller figures. Griphook wore a coat of muted browns, but Grinfield wore a dark purple velvet suit with gold braid trim. Gottenram wore a suit of crimson and royal blue, also trimmed in gold. The 2 goblin presidents regarded Harry and his friends with thinly veiled disgust as they took their seats. Once everyone had seated, Grinfield bluntly informed the 3 that they were not permitted inside Gringotts. "What?" exploded Ron. "I thought the ministry had taken care of all that." "No," replied Grinfield contemptuously, his long fingers clasped beneath his chin behind his beard. "Their negotiations make it possible for you 3 to walk around free, without fear of goblin reprisal for your actions inside Gringotts," he explained. "You are very fortunate for this concession," added the goblin calmly, his black eyes glittering slits, daring them to disagree. "Our justice has no prison, permits no second chances, and accepts no excuses, no matter how justified you think they may be." Grinfield's words were antagonistic, and his black eyes never left Harry's face. Harry fought to keep calm. There had to be more than that to this meeting, he thought. But what? "It does not require a bank president to tell us this," he said to Grinfield finally. "Why have you come?" "You 3 are nothing more than mere bank thieves to us," stated Gottenram disdainfully, "and as such should never again set foot within Gringotts." "But you have been accorded special favor among the wand carriers," sneered Grinfield. "Because of that special status, and because we are not unaware that you have saved one of our kind, at some personal risk to yourself," interjected Gottenram, his long yellow fingers twisting his beard to a point. "We have decided to offer you a chance to again bank at Gringotts," continued Grinfield, "but you must meet certain conditions first." "You want us to grovel or something to get back into Gringotts?" stated Ron defensively. "Well, forget that." "What might the conditions be?" asked Hermione quickly, before the goblins took offense at Ron's words. Not that they did. They seemed to take little notice of Ron at all, which served to anger Ron more. "First and foremost," demanded Grinfield, "we wish the items stolen from Gringotts returned. Then you would no longer be thieves." "But that's impossible," blurted Ron. "We can't return it. It's been destroyed." "That is as we suspected," Gottenram replied impassively. He brought up his long yellow fingers to stroke his beard as he spoke, and his lips curled into a sneer. "Especially if you have managed to escape our personal gain curse. But we must ensure that such a breakout does not occur again," the goblin continued flatly. "Therefore, we demand, instead, you give us a complete accounting of your break-in, how you did it, and all sources of information that made it possible. We have, of course, instituted new safeguards, but we would rest easier knowing we had eliminated all previous weaknesses." "That's ridiculous," stated Ron, rising from his seat angrily. "You should know that." "Ron," said Harry sharply. Ron looked at Harry. Then he sat back down, subsiding into disgruntled silence. The goblins were up to something. Harry could tell that much, but he didn't know what. He did know it would be wisest to keep silent about everything and anything, at least, until he could figure out more. Harry chose his words carefully. He didn't want to reveal anything, nor did he wish to offend. "I'm not proud of what we did at Gringotts," he said slowly, "but it was necessary to defeat Lord Voldemort." Both Gottenram and Grinfield drew in a swift intake of breath at the mention of that name. "That's over now," continued Harry. "It is best forgotten, never to be mentioned again. I have no intention to talk about any of it, even to you." "Especially not to you," admitted Harry to himself. The 2 goblins, with their haughty, disdainful manner, did not encourage cooperation. "And your friends?" taunted Grinfield. He did not seem overly disturbed by Harry's refusal. What did they really want? What were they really after? "Do you speak for them as well?" Everyone's attention turned to Ron and Hermione. Hermione nodded her head instantly. Yes, he does, she agreed. It took Ron a few minutes longer, thinking, before he finally spoke in an annoyed tone. Yeah, he does. If you have no intention of ever speaking of it again, spoke Gottenram indifferently, perhaps you would consent to a memory modification, eliminating all knowledge of the event. His eyes narrowed as he spoke, watching Harry carefully. Harry thought seriously about that for a few minutes. No, he finally said. My memories are important to me. I will not consent to have them erased or modified by anyone. And certainly not by a goblin, he added silently. I can assure you, he continued aloud, that we will not mention our activities concerning Gringotts with anyone. Is that a promise? Asked Griphook suddenly. It was his first time to speak since the meeting had begun. Harry looked over at Griphook. Yes, he said firmly, meeting Griphook's gaze squarely. It's a promise. He looked at the two other goblins as well, with all the sincerity he could, willing them to believe him. It was never our intention to compromise the security of Gringotts, then or in the future, he added. From behind him, he heard Hermione agree as well, and a few seconds later came Ron's reluctant promise. He knew it must gall Ron to make a promise to a goblin. Was it his imagination, or did Griphook seem to relax, just for a moment, before his expression became inscrutable? There was a stir from the goblins. Finally, Grenfield spoke. We have heard, he began contemptuously, looking directly at Harry, that the word of Harry Potter might actually be kept, even though you are a wand carrier. It seems that we shall be forced to see if that is true. Harry felt Ron relax in his seat next to him. There, that's settled then, said Ron. Does that mean we can go into Gringotts now? He asked impatiently. No, came the reply. What? Ron exploded. So what'd you ask us for? He asked angrily. To hear your responses. To gauge for ourselves the nature of the wand carriers with whom we dealt. And what did you determine? Inquired Harry, watching them closely. What did they want? That your words may have some merit, and deserve further consideration. Harry said nothing, giving the goblins time for more consideration. Your name and word carries considerable weight with the wand carriers, and we will hold you to it, continued Grenfield flatly after a few minutes. But a promise is not enough, he sneered. You have invaded our bank, and we need a more tangible assurance to guarantee it will not happen again before we will consent to let you bank at Gringotts. What would that be? Asked Hermione cautiously. Griphook brought out an intricately carved box and set it on the table before them. The atmosphere in the room changed, ever so subtly. Had Harry not been watching for such a change, he would have missed it. This was the purpose of the meeting. That which had occurred before had been what? A diversion? The first act? We want your promise to not reveal the secrets of Gringotts, stated Grenfield flatly, which you have already freely given. And, he continued in an arrogant voice, we want you to wear this. Griphook opened the box. It contained 3 identical silver bracelets that sparkled and gleamed in the light. Harry picked up one and examined it closer. The band was scarcely half a centimeter wide and very thin, yet it contained an intricate design of vines and flowers in fine detail. It's beautiful, exclaimed Hermione, who had also reached out and picked up a bracelet. It's goblin craftsmanship, proclaimed Ron, eyeing it with distrust. He did not pick up the 3rd bracelet. Filled with goblin magic, no doubt, he added suspiciously. Harry looked up at the goblins. Is that true? He asked them. They did not reply, but only watched him impassively with their glittering black eyes. What does it do? Harry persisted. It gives us your exact location when you are in Gringotts, stated Gottenram flatly. And what else does it do? Snorted Ron, immediately skeptical. If that's only what it does. It probably keeps track of whomever wears it everywhere, every day. No, corrected Gottenram with a sneer. We have no interest in your whereabouts outside of Gringotts, he added, ignoring the first part of Ron's question. It is well known, he continued, that you 3 left Gringotts riding on a dragon. What is not so well known is that we have no record that Harry Potter, Ron Weasley, or Hermione Granger entered Gringotts that day. It is this activity we wish to prevent from occurring again. If, as you claim," he added skeptically, "you have no further intention of robbing Gringotts, it should do you no harm for us to know your location at all times while on the premise." Gottenram leaned back in the chair and glared at the three. "If you think I'm going to walk around Diagon Alley wearing some goblin-made band like a brand for all to see, guess again," stated Ron belligerently. "I don't need to bank at Gringotts." "Not now," agreed Harry softly, "but someday." Harry fingered the band thoughtfully. "Can it be removed?" inquired Hermione, looking from the bracelet to the goblins before setting the bracelet carefully back down within the box. "You may remove it at any time you wish," replied Grinfield indifferently, as if the bracelets were of no concern. But no one else could remove it, and the bracelet could not again be placed back on. His eyes narrowed, and he looked suspiciously at Hermione, as if she had already worn and removed the bracelet. "We would know the bracelet had been removed," he added in a superior voice, "and you would not be permitted within Gringotts afterwards." "How long would we have to wear it?" Hermione asked next, seeking catches or loopholes in the terms. "For the rest of your life," came the reply. "You have got to be bloody well kidding," exploded Ron. "I don't want to be collared with that for the rest of my life." Gottenram straightened in his chair. "That choice is yours," he told Ron haughtily. "But if you wish to return to Gringotts, you will wear the bracelet." They had made their demand. It was up to the three to accept or reject it. Harry set down the bracelet and looked over at the two goblins. "Would you excuse us for a few minutes, please, while we discuss your proposal?" he asked them. They nodded without expression. Harry rose and withdrew to a corner of the room, followed by Ron and Hermione. "It's some sort of trap," muttered Ron suspiciously. "I agree," whispered Harry. "But what kind of trap?" "We could put these bands on, and it'll give those goblins some sort of control over us for the rest of our lives, and we'll never break free," continued Ron. "At the very least, they'll be able to point to the bracelets and lord over us. I say we refuse and make a counter-proposal. What do you think all the wizards would do if they learned Gringotts wouldn't bank with us?" "I don't think they're going to negotiate," whispered Hermione. "They want us to say no. We get them out of a difficult situation if we say no. They've made it clear they don't want us there, but, as you said, the wizards will be angry if we can't use the bank. If we say no, it won't be Gringotts refusing to bank with us. It'll be us refusing to bank with them. The other wizards can't complain about that." "Actually," said Harry quietly, "it's not that unreasonable a request, considering all the damage we did last time." "That's assuming they haven't lied to us about what it does," hissed Ron, "and goblins can't be trusted." "Maybe it's not a trap so much as a test," countered Harry thoughtfully, looking over at the goblins. "Perhaps one concerning character. They must trust us to not speak about Gringotts, and we must trust them with these bracelets." "But you can't trust them," hissed Ron. "They always have something up their sleeve." "We trusted Griphook," said Hermione. "That worked. You could be wrong about them." "Not bloody likely," snorted Ron. "Griphook double-crossed us in the end, just like I knew he would." "And what were you planning to do to him?" Hermione retorted angrily. "That could be what they still have up their sleeve," interrupted Harry, still watching the goblins. They sat arrogantly in their chairs, watching the three. Harry could sense their contempt and hatred for him from across the room. They could be counting on our natural distrust of goblins to cause us to refuse their offer, when it was all actually on the up and up. It would amuse them were their offer genuine, and our suspicions kept us from availing ourselves of it. He looked again at the goblins. "This bracelet does only what you have described, and nothing more?" he asked them from across the room, looking intently at their faces. "Nothing more," Grinfield confirmed with a sneer, meeting Harry's gaze defiantly with his glittering black eyes. "And if I put this bracelet on, I will again be permitted to conduct business at Gringotts with no further strings attached?" "That is correct." "What if one of us should accidentally mention something about the break-in?" asked Ron. "Then all three of you will have broken your word, and you will not be permitted within Gringotts. Once the details are revealed, they cannot be recalled." "And if one of us should remove the bracelet, but does not reveal the details of the break-in?" asked Hermione. "What of the other two?" "They could still bank at Gringotts." What assurances do we have the bracelet does only what you say? Asked Hermione. You have our word, replied Gottenram proudly. As if we would ever take your word for anything, muttered Ron under his breath. We might, corrected Harry softly, still watching both goblins closely, under the right circumstances. He took a deep breath and walked back to the table, having made his decision. We shall see if a goblin is as good as his word, he said with finality. Harry took one of the bracelets and slipped it on his left wrist. It immediately shrank to fit snugly around his wrist without binding. Grenfield's black eyes narrowed at Harry's challenge, but whether it was from satisfaction or displeasure, Harry could not tell. Without a word, Hermione walked to the table. Their word, she corrected proudly, and put on the second bracelet. It also shrank to fit her wrist. Hermione looked defiantly at both Grenfield and Gottenram. Harry and Hermione looked at Ron expectantly. Oh, well, he muttered disgustedly, coming forward. At least we'll all be in this together. He grabbed the third bracelet and put it on his wrist. It shrank to fit and immediately vanished from sight. What the? He looked wildly around at Harry and Hermione. Harry looked down at his own wrist. He could still feel the bracelet, but it, too, had vanished, as had Hermione's. He looked up at Grenfield for an explanation. You are indeed a most unusual wand-carrier, Mr. Potter, said Grenfield, standing up. Gottenram and Griphook stood also. This is a private arrangement, Gottenram added proudly, just between us. There is no need to broadcast it to the rest of the world. Well, why didn't you say so earlier, accused Ron. The goblin said nothing, while staring arrogantly back at Ron. So it was a test of sorts, said Hermione, rubbing her invisible band. You wanted to see if we'd do it, thinking everyone else would know. What happens now? Now, said Gottenram, we leave. It has been a most interesting meeting you, Harry Potter. Perhaps we shall see each other some day within Gringotts. Without another word, the three goblins left the room. As soon as the door closed, Harry turned to Hermione. Do you think you could cook up some spell to put on us so we don't accidentally talk about Gringotts? He asked her. Whatever for? Asked Ron. We already promised. We won't talk. Not intentionally, agreed Harry, but I don't know how I'd stand up should someone slip some Veritaserum in my drink and then start asking questions. There's a lot of people out there right now who want to know what happened before the last battle, Gringotts included, and they'll be pretty persistent. I don't want any of us to slip up somehow accidentally. It's just banking at Gringotts, said Ron dismissively. If we slip up, we can put our money someplace else. It's not Gringotts I'm worried about, said Harry. It's Griphook. Griphook? Asked Hermione. What do you mean? I don't think they know he helped us, replied Harry. Of course they do, protested Ron. Why else would he have been in there with them? Because we rescued him, replied Harry, and he spent time with us while recovering, so Griphook knows us better than the average goblin does. But I don't think the other goblins know Griphook actually helped us. I bet they think one of the wizard employees, Bill or Fleur perhaps, since they used to work at Gringotts, gave us information and helped us get in. Harry paced the room, putting his thoughts into words. I bet Griphook was expected to keep all sorts of secrets while he worked at Gringotts, Harry continued. Do you think he'd be walking around free if they thought he had anything to do with the break-in? At the very least, he should have received the same punishment we'd have received if the Ministry hadn't stepped in. You know the Ministry wouldn't have included Griphook in their negotiations, even if they had known about him, which they didn't. But he wasn't working there when we rescued him, reminded Hermione. He had quit. I doubt that makes any difference to the goblin community, replied Harry earnestly. You heard Grenfield. He said goblin justice makes no allowances for excuses, no matter how justified you think they are. It's one thing if a wizard helped us, but how do you think the goblins would feel if they learned one of their own ratted out on them? They'd be very angry at that goblin, whispered Hermione. Exactly, concluded Harry. The goblins wouldn't give Griphook a hero's welcome for what he did, yet he's still walking around free. That means they can't already know. But Griphook is a double-crossing git that none of us liked, stated Ron contemptuously. What do we care what happens to him? Because he helped us when we needed it, replied Harry firmly, and we couldn't have defeated Lord Voldemort without him. I won't have Griphook's life destroyed because of what he did for us. Ron couldn't argue with that. So Hermione did research and came up with an anti-talking spell specific to anything related to the Gringotts breakout. Harry had a word with Bill and Fleur, alerting them to keep quiet as well. Whether it was their own willpower or Hermione's spell, the three never discussed the breakout to anyone or mentioned Griphook even in passing. When Harry next saw Griphook, it was in Gringotts. Griphook was wearing a uniform of scarlet and gold. He was again a proud bank employee. "Who's that?" asked Holly as they neared the front doors. She was looking at the doorman, a small person with a rounded head, pointed beard, and big feet. He had on a uniform of scarlet and gold and stood proudly at attention while he awaited their arrival. "That's a goblin," replied Harry as they walked forward. "Goblins own and manage Gringotts." The goblin opened the door and bowed as they walked in. Harry and Holly stopped for a minute before the second pair of doors, silver this time, so she could read the words engraved upon them. Sasha leaped lightly onto Holly's shoulder, purring loudly in her ear while they read the words. "Enter, stranger, but take heed of what awaits the sin of greed. For those who take but do not earn must pay most dearly in their turn. So if you seek beneath our floors a treasure that was never yours, thief, you have been warned. Beware of finding more than treasure there." "You've a silver band on your wrist," said Holly suddenly when she had finished reading the inscription. They had continued on their way, walking through the doors, and stood at the entrance of a vast marble hall. "What?" said Harry, looking down at his wrist, the one Holly was pointing to. Yes, I guess I do." "I don't remember seeing it on your wrist before," added Holly. "I don't suppose you would," replied Harry calmly, not elaborating further. He hardly ever thought about the bracelet any more. It became visible only within the walls of Gringotts and seemed to do just what Grinfield had promised, much to the dismay of Ron, who still regarded it with considerable mistrust. "Hello, Mr. Potter," came a courteous voice next to Harry. Harry looked down to see Griphook standing next to him. "Hello, Griphook," replied Harry cordially. It was always Griphook who met him at the doors of Gringotts the moment Harry entered. Harry often wondered whether this was by Griphook's own request or by command of the president's, but he never asked. The two of them never talked about anything that wasn't strictly business. "I'd like to introduce you to my cousin, Miss Holly Wycliffe," he said to Griphook. Griphook's black eyes glittered as he nodded his head in her direction. "She has a vault here which I'd like to show her," Harry added. "You have a key, sir?" asked Griphook politely. "Yes," replied Harry. He pulled out a tiny gold key and showed it to Griphook. Griphook looked at it closely. "That seems to be in order, sir," he said. "Come with me." Harry repocketed the key. Then the two followed Griphook towards one of the doors leading off the hall. Holly could scarcely keep her eyes off the many goblins in the main hall. There were literally hundreds of them, all sitting at counters, busily working. Their oversized round heads and long skinny fingers fascinated her. The goblins were all stern-faced, working intently under burning torches that floated overhead. On the counters next to the goblins were huge, old-fashioned balance scales, upon which the goblins were weighing various things. Some scales were filled with gold coins, and others with silver, while still more held a dazzling array of red, green, pink, and blue gemstones. How different this room was from the Muggle bank she had visited earlier to deposit her father's money. The Muggle bank was small in comparison, with a few smiling female clerks who greeted her. They deposited her paper money cheerfully. Holly doubted the people there could handle all the gold and gems she saw around in Gringotts. Griphook opened one of the doors that led off the main marble hall. Behind lay a narrow stone passage lit with flaming torches. It sloped steeply downward and had little railway tracks running down the middle of the floor. Griphook whistled, and a small cart rolled swiftly up to them. The three climbed in. "Hang on," whispered Cousin Harry to Holly. Holly immediately urged Sasha back into her bag, tucking it between herself and Cousin Harry, and got a tight grip on the edge of the cart. Suddenly the cart took off. It rounded a corner and then another one and continued on in total darkness, leaving the lit torches behind at the doorway. Holly would have been scared whizzing along in the dark, but she happened to look over at the direction of Cousin Harry and noticed a soft silver glow emanating from his bracelet. Holly kept her eyes glued to the light of the band as the cart turned at right angles and turned again, and again, and again, always heading further down. Leathery bat wings brushed against Holly's face and arms as they moved. At least she thought that's what they were. Deeper and deeper they traveled. Icy cold drops of water splashed onto Holly, and once she heard the sound of rushing water. Abruptly the cart came to a stop. A single candle flickered on, illuminating a door near the cart. All three got out of the cart. Holly clung to the cart until her senses returned. She'd been totally disoriented from the wild cart ride in the darkness. "Your key?" requested Griphook. Cousin Harry brought it out again and handed it to Griphook. Griphook took the key and unlocked the door. Green smoke billowed out from behind the door. When the smoke cleared, Holly looked into the room. She saw a stack of coins, gold and silver ones, mounted in a heap in the center of the room. They sparkled in the candlelight. "Is that all for me?" she asked in wonderment. "Uh-huh," replied Cousin Harry. "It could easily take care of a year or two at Hogwarts, should you ever need it," he added quietly. Holly stepped cautiously into the room. Her footsteps echoed loudly. She picked up a couple of gold coins and then backed out again. She looked expectantly up at Cousin Harry. "Ready to leave?" he asked her. "I guess so," said Holly. "Yes, sir." The three got back into the cart. An icy blast of air blew out the candle, and the cart started moving again. Holly kept her eyes fixed on the light of Cousin Harry's wristband as the cart took a new route, wheeling its way uphill even faster than their descent. The wheels clattered loudly as they moved. Sometimes Holly thought she could see huge, sinister, shadowy shapes out of the corner of her eyes moving behind the cart. A couple of times Holly heard the sounds of loud, menacing roars and growls that echoed eerily in the caves, no doubt belonging to some unnamed creatures. There were places where the cold cave air suddenly turned warm and stinky, only to grow cold again when the cart had turned and continued up. When the cart finally came to a stop at the surface, they were next to a large wooden door, illuminated by torches. Griphook opened the door and watched as they stepped through. Then he carefully closed the door behind them and returned the key to Cousin Harry. Again, the three were in the marble halls of Gringotts, with the other goblins still busily working away. But they had come out at a new location, different from where they had entered. "Will there be anything else?" asked Griphook as he escorted the two through the halls of Gringotts. "Not today," replied Cousin Harry. "Then thank you for coming," Griphook said politely while showing them to the exit. "Please come again." "We will," assured Cousin Harry. Once outside of Gringotts, Cousin Harry pulled Holly aside. "Unfortunately," he told Holly, "goblin gold does not transfigure, so we can't put this key on your charm bracelet." "Well, we could," he amended, "but it's the wrong size and everything else in your charm bracelet is silver. The gold key would stick out and look exactly like what it is." Sasha leaped lightly on Holly's shoulder and balanced herself there, while Cousin Harry drew out a slender gold chain from his pocket and strung the Gringotts key on it. The key and chain seemed to immediately vanish, blending in with the surroundings. Looking carefully, Holly could just barely see a hint of the key and chain as it swayed beneath his fingers. Cousin Harry attached the nearly invisible chain with a key around Holly's neck. "It won't come loose," he assured her. "And it's a goblin chain with a chameleon spell," Cousin Harry added. "They'll be hard, if not impossible, to see while the two are together. That way the key and chain won't show or interfere with any other jewelry you may wish to wear." Holly could feel the weight of the chain and key. Reaching for the key, she could feel its solid shape within her fingers. When she held the key up to her eye, she could just barely discern its shape. "Don't take the chain off unless you need to use the key," Cousin Harry instructed. "That way it won't get lost. If you need to return to Gringotts, just take the key off the chain. Then the key will become visible again. Show your key to any of the goblins at Gringotts and tell them what you need. They'll be sure to help you." Holly nodded at his words. That all seemed easy enough to remember. Then she looked over at Cousin Harry's wrist. "Your band!" she suddenly exclaimed. "It's gone. Does it have a chameleon spell, too?" she asked. Cousin Harry looked over at his wrist. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "I suppose it could. I guess I've never thought about it. We'd best be going," he added, changing the subject. "Where to next?" "Bertie Bott's," replied Cousin Harry. "We're meeting everyone there." With Sasha perched jauntily on her shoulder, Holly followed Cousin Harry through the alley.